Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of Let's Discuss Cafe, where we brew up the perfect blend of legal insights and creative conversations. Today, we are thrilled to have an extraordinary guest with us, a dynamic corporate lawyer with a passion for sustainable innovation and a love for art, literature, and cinema. She's a blogger, a certified yoga teacher, a behavioral therapy practitioner. Please welcome the multifaceted and inspiring Radhika Kulkarni. So, hey Radhika, wel-
Hi,
welcome to Let's Discuss Cafe podcast.
thank you so much.
Okay, so without wasting any time, let me ask you the first question. Legal creativity and precision. Radhika, as a diligent corporate lawyer, you emphasize precision in legal services. How do you balance creativity with the need of accuracy? Share any instance where your creative approach led to a successful legal outcome.
That's a very interesting question. Um, Actually, so to say, when I started my stint at an ad agency or the creative firm, the thing was it was a startup, and as you know, in startup you have to wear quite a few hats. So at that point of time, I was writing jingles for quite a few products, and at the same time, I was looking after their legal documentation as well. So what happens in these scenarios is when you want to write something or when you want to present something into the market, you want to attract the right kind of attention, right? So the whole purpose of writing something was to make it catchy, to make it attractive, and also to make it appealing. While drafting legal documents, it's a completely different ball game. While here you attract the precise kind of audience, here you have to attack. In legal documents, you generally, whenever you reply to some notices that have come to your way, or when you want to happen to send someone a notice for something, you just have to make sure that it is cutting edge and it just kind of hits the spot. So there was one particular incident wherein I was able to apply some of my legal acumen combined with my ex-boss's skills of jugaad, and then we got something done. So this was pertaining to an issue of copyright infringement, wherein we had set up some, exhibition type of thing, and we saw that there were a lot others doing the same kind of things, but they were exhibiting their products. But this one particular agency had happened to have the same name as us, and they happened to also say that they have a trademark, which was completely a false claim because we were the original owners of the trademark. So at that point in time, my big boss had asked me, Ki Radhika, why don't we send a notice to these people and, ask for the right kind of compensation? Or if they want, do a franchise arrangement with us and maybe we can take some compensation from them. So I said, let's wait it out. Let's ensure that this person never uses our logos or our ideas ever again. So the Jugado element in this was one of my associates. She pretended to call him up and pretended to be a restaurateur and said that, she really liked this person's name and it was too catchy and she's interested in a franchise. And then she asked for their balance sheets and also for the trademark related documents, where this guy started then saying that, they don't have a trademark and they are not the original owners of this particular IP. And then, he kind of spilled the beans on it and even took down the whole thing, because of which, we did not have to face this issue again. And it was one learning at that time for us to have an infringement monitoring mechanism in place. So we hired some patent and IP attorneys who would help us out with monthly reports, telling us if there would be any infringement. And thankfully, after that incident, no one ever infringed that particular trademark.
Right. That was very interesting and unique episode. Yeah, as an IP attorney, as an ex-IP attorney, right, I would say like we do investigations on, potential infringers where we try to gather evidence. But yeah,
Right.
bring them as a collaborator or franchisee seeker is something I don't think we have ever done. Right?
Yeah.
One who has ever done that. Right. So that's really interesting. So we can say that you have created from e-commerce content to legal content, right?
Right.
I understand that you have written and designed creative content for over 200 products.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Right from agarbatti to rice. I think I've been instrumental in selling everything for that particular firm. But, it was a very unique kind of an opportunity because I was always interested in writing. Uh, my father had always kind of, pushed me to write and, have my own blogs. So in the lockdown, actually, the whole thing started. I started writing movie reviews, book reviews. And at that time, I channeled my creativity most particularly because there was a lot of time on our hands and we were running out of options as to what to do, what to do, what to do. So I thought of, being creative at that point of time. And my ex-boss was wise enough to, ask me to help out in these bits. So we would, sit together, brainstorm, and then kind of, put those ads out on the Facebook page and things like that. So it was very interesting at that point in time. And at the same time, the legal work was not stopping. So there were two things which I had to do, and it was pretty fun. It was good while it lasted. And at that time, I think I also had the opportunity. They were dealing with a client who deals in environment and waste management. So that kind of gave me a lot of food for thought that, there's so much to be done. There's so much of sustainability to be achieved. And then my brain started actually gravitating in that direction. So it was really nice.
Right. And see, this was one of my primary motivation to invite you on the podcast because I receive calls from a lot of my ex-students of Fusion Rock, right? And their query is that they have been recently placed somewhere in a company, right? And the work they're getting is not 100% legal.
Right.
This happens a lot in startups. So there is one school of thought, like, where you belong. You say, like, embrace every opportunity, embrace your creativity. But then there's a very, I would say, conservative school of thought as well, which is like, initial days are really important for your learning, right?
Right.
Your organization's need may not be the best alignment for you. So make sure that you are getting the hardcore legal work. If you get more legal work, obviously your learning would be right a degree higher, right? So what would be wise to be like? How would you deal such a situation?
Actually, that's a very insightful question. See, what I can only speak from my experience and the experience of my friends and colleagues. So, what happens generally, at least in my humble experiences, when you are an associate at a law firm in your very first year of your job, the kind of work that you get is not something that's very serious in nature. So, if you're supposed to vet a report and submit it by end of day, and you submit it maybe by tomorrow morning, I'm not encouraging procrastination, but I'm just saying that if you do, um, it's not very serious. It's okay. Or maybe, nothing's going to collapse. So I feel that at the initial level, the kind of work that is anyways delegated is either for assessment of our own character or of our assessment of, or for the assessment of our own work ethic. But I think it, according to me at least, while we learn a lot from the kind of work that is given, the outcome is the same. So suppose you join a startup, the kind of work they give you, the only difference is they have full trust in you from the day you join. It's like, I am giving it to you, you do it. So you have some sort of autonomy when you can drive things. Whereas when you get hardcore legal work, I see that you are a lot dependent on someone else for some things, and which is fine, which is as it should be. But as a person who enjoys having some degree of freedom and autonomy to do things in my own way, I would lean in a very liberal direction. I would not lean towards a conservative direction because sometimes what happens is our seniors are also very busy and they have very little time for mentoring us, which is just fine. But I would say that the outcome of both types of the work is the same. But that element of trust is different. You will have more trust placed in you in a startup. You will have more autonomy and you have the power to drive things your way, which is as opposed to a proper corporate or a proper legal firm where, you have to follow some channels and things have to go in proper direction. And honestly speaking, you get things done faster in a startup as compared with a process-driven firm.
Absolutely. So in your case, was there some doubt that, is hardcore legal work is for me when you joined the startup?
No, not really, because as a person who was always curious, I had that one thing in my mind always. So, even you studied law for 5 years, I've studied law for 5 years in Pune. So we had this subject called political science. I think in our second year, first semester, I think we had poli-sci. So at that point of time, when we were students of that subject, reading Bentham, reading Plato, Aristotle. It just gave me a lot to think about. And I mean, it was not just the fact of doing the paperwork per se, but it was also a lot of things that surround it. That, why has this particular thing come to me? The analysis, the what do you call it? The breaking down of the whole thing. So for me, when I joined a startup and I was given all this sort of work, I understood what were the linkages. So suppose today I'm getting to write jingles for a couple of products, and the next day I'm getting to draft the privacy policy for the website. You can connect the dots. It's because you want those things to be protected. It's also because you want to assert your copyright to the kind of things that you've written. You don't want anyone else to kind of steal it from you. You don't want plagiarism. So I think whenever there's an opportunity to connect the dots, that's my jam. Let's just call it that. Paperwork, just for the fact that, I'm a law firm associate, or the fact that I get to do this all day long, does not give me that much of a kick.
Absolutely. Makes sense. And see, whenever I'm speaking to lawyers, they're always about, as a lawyer, you must understand the business. I think you you took it to the extreme end, right?
Right.
So tell us something about your experience at ILS. How was it? Tell us something interesting that people usually don't know about ILS.
Okay, so I think that people know this about ILS, but they don't use it enough. ILS has a beautiful library. I mean, I think I squeezed the juice out of my fees for every last penny. I was in that library all the time. All the time. So whenever I would finish my classes, I would just go for a swim, and I would return. And then there was nothing to do in the hostel room. So at that time, I just used to go to the library and sit for hours and hours. Most of the times, I would read this book on international law by Malcolm and Shaw. And sometimes I would just go to their novel section. That's where I picked up a lot of Salman Rushdie's books. That's where I picked up Arundhati Roy. And it was just so beautiful. And I had all this time on my hands, So I used it very wisely. I developed my character, read a lot of books. And, when I was here, I'm an only child. So a certain way in which I was brought up. Let's just put it that way. So when I left for Pune, I saw a lot of people who were so different from me, who were way smarter than me. I was not the smartest in the room. And that kind of pushed me to sort of do my best everywhere and be my best everywhere. So, and one major part of it was reading a lot of books. So I think something that is known about ILS but still not explored the way it should be is the library, which is there. The beautiful kind of resources which are at the fingertips of the students if they want it. And I think very friendly librarians. Like if you would ask them that, you want this book and it's not available, they would get it for you, and they would loan it to you for a very reasonable price. So I think that my time in ILS, I think out of the 5 years, 2.5 years was spent in the library. Let's just...
So essentially, you dated books in your college.
Absolutely. Only dated books in my college.
Right. I would say that's a loss for the guys in Pune. But
that's sweet of you.
coming back to the important stuff, right? So, there's a lot of entrepreneurs and small business owners who hear our podcast, right? So you are quite good at unlocking potential of small businesses.
Right.
Your awareness of government schemes is really commendable. Which specific schemes, in your opinion, have the potential to elevate a small business?
Okay, so there are a couple, and after the interview, I'll be sending out a few links to you as well, which you could kind of, circulate in your circle, and people can get access to it. Okay, so one of my favorites right now is, and which we are currently using, is the Startup India scheme. You can get your inventions patented for a fraction of the price. And you can also get your logos and, unique designs trademarked, and even, I think, word marked. So even word marking of your words is possible at a fraction of the price. So I was once dealing with an organization which was into environmental entrepreneurship, and they had come up with a very unique kind of a waste to composting machine which could generate compost from waste in a period of only 3 to 4 days and using the best quality of compost. But the problem was that they did not have that kind of a budget to go for a, proper patent. So formed their own startup And under the aegis of that startup, we got the invention patented, and now they are on their way to, kind of checking if there's a if they could go for a global patent on that particular thing. So I think Startup India scheme is number one. Second is NABARD. So I would encourage all entrepreneurs to constantly check out the NABARD website, because they have very good schemes, and especially for women, if at all they are into business of artisans and craftsmanship, and selling the local handmade products online or things like that, basically bringing handicrafts to the cosmopolitan cities, they can avail very good benefit from those schemes. So NABARD website is a must that you have to check out. Again, check out the Startup India website every day, because they have very good offers, and they have very good notifications which are coming up. Another very good resource, I would say, is for people who are engaged in agriculture and self-help groups and that kind of a business. I would encourage them to check out the Maharashtra State Government website. There's a different section for self-help groups. So I would encourage them to check out that section. Especially after 2020, we saw a rise in these women-led businesses, self-help groups, or these tiffin services, or that kind of things. So Maharashtra government does give a very good grant for those kind of services if one intends to provide. And again, if it's a woman, the rate of interest is very low, and the period of interest begins after 5 to 6 years, which is I think a plus.
Right. Personally, I've been part of a lot of incubation centers in India, and some of them are run by government. For instance, Atal Incubation.
Atal incubation, yeah.
Really fabulous. And now a lot of private groups are also jumping in. So as per my knowledge, a lot of universities or colleges and deemed universities are also opening their incubation centers where you get co-working space and some kind of grant.
Support.
Right. So I have met around 5 to 10 entrepreneurs who had an idea, who applied to these startup scheme, and they were given, I think, 5 to 10 lakh rupees. I don't remember, was it a grant or was it in the return of equity? But I felt like when I heard this, I felt that was really amazing, because for a small business, right, we're just starting.
That money is huge.
Right. So can you guide our listeners as to how to apply to these schemes and what is the general operation there?
Okay, so that's a little bit bureaucratic, and the process can take around if conservatively, I'm saying 4 months, and if you're fast enough, you can, or if you're prompt enough, maybe you can lock it in 2.5 months. At least in Maharashtra, it happens that way. And I think there's a long process actually. I would feel comfortable to kind of write it down for you post the interview, and I can send you the notes.
Absolutely. You can publish a blog on this topic on our website, and we'll put a link to that.
I would be very happy to, because I think describing the whole process would take me more than an hour.
Yeah, it would be really boring for. And in future, that just reminds me, I'll invite a lot of people, I think, who have received these grants, and then, we can really hear their
Stop.
right, as to what, because I know one person from Mumbai itself who is doing a really amazing work in renewable sector, and he has received grant from 4 5 institutions, right? So that's a good idea for the future. Now moving on, your, in addition to your expertise in helping businesses get these government schemes, you are also quite adept at navigating government tenders. So with participation in 20 plus government tenders, what advice would you give to organizations seeking government contracts? How do you decode the complex tender documents?
Okay, so there's a couple of guidelines which I would like to give on that. Number one is to always be fluent in the local language of the particular state that you're dealing in. Because what happens is, since we operate in Maharashtra, even when the tender document is in English, there are a few things which, just can't be translated. So in the technical specifications, or in some of their requirements, or the eligibility criteria, as you call it, they would add that particular technical specification. And supposing if a firm does not have good expertise of Marathi, because Marathi is the language we speak here, So supposing if someone does not have that expertise, or even if you try Google Translate, the results are not up to the mark, and it could lead to confusion sometimes. So despite having the expertise, a person could lose out on what's been given. Second is, I would, this is a very generic advice, but a very important one, to read the eligibility criteria, because it's the gospel of the tender, to read it thoroughly. Because what happens is, at times they put one particular condition, makes you ineligible for the particular tender. So at that point in time, there are a couple of email IDs which are given at the end of the document, wherein you can write to them and tell them that, we are falling into this, but this particular clause is something which we find problematic. And there are officials who will meet you, who will guide you to the requirements. And if they feel that, it is something that is changed. So if you feel that there is one particular thing that is kind of stopping you from getting the tender, write to those emails which are given, talk to those people, and it requires a little bit of a follow-up. It's a bureaucratic process, I'm not going to deny that, but it does yield some results. So this is the second advice, to read the eligibility criteria thoroughly. And the third one is that I would suggest is, while uploading the documents of the tender, even if it's not mentioned, always submit the balance sheets of your organization. It creates a good impression. Always submit the kind of turnover that you've had in the past year. And supposing the tender has come into like 1st April, 2nd April, and you do not have the audited balance sheets, submit the sales register. That's also good enough.
Okay, that's really interesting. And any practical insight for the under the table demands that keep on going, right? What's your experience in that particular aspect?
Okay, so I was afraid you were going to bring this up.
Like obviously, we are not going to take any names, but let's
Yeah. That kind of stuff happens. That stuff happens all the time. In that particular regard, there is one advice which I kind of always follow. I'm not saying don't apply for these kind of tenders. If the ticket size is huge, do apply, and that kind of stuff needs to be done. Do it. But if you feel that the demand from the other side is way too high, you can always flag a clause in the tender, and you can say that this violates the provisions of the Competition Act and constitutes unfair competition. So you could always contend under the Competition Act, because ultimately we all want to compete fairly, and no one wants to get a tender just because they have some kind of connections. So I would say always cite the Competition Act, and if and when possible, try to have a one-on-one meeting with these reluctant people who do not want to give you the contract. Try to sit them down, persuade them. If their demands seem reasonable to you, just maybe yield to them. But very good advice would be to apply for tenders because even corporates, they do have tendering. And, these PSUs, they are fantastic. So even PSU tendering is very good. The ticket size is also very nice, and the profit margins are also, I think, very reasonable. So there is less to none, I would say, under the table scenario in PSUs.
Oh, that's really interesting. And
Yeah.
one of the difficult part of dealing with government tenders is getting paid ultimately. So any hacks that you have that might expedite the payment?
Right. So number one would be to be involved. So when I used to work into tenders, I would not just fill out the paperwork. I would not just submit those documents and upload it on the website. I would find out, like, every tender document has that maybe on the second last or last page, or depending on the format of the document, it does have the name and email address of one SPOC, at least one SPOC whose name and address is mentioned. Chase that person. So the point is, in whole of government tendering, the point is to be aggressive. The more aggressive you are, the higher the likelihood of you getting what you want. So I think be more involved, because what happens in government generally is they like people who show up. They like people who have conversations with them. I'm not necessarily saying to have personal conversations, but like people who are very dedicated to their work. Now, you and I, we think differently. You and I are very comfortable in our homes having a discussion online right now. But if it were to be government, and if I were to have been a government official inviting you, then you would have to come to Bombay. So,
And that's actually true for most of the businesses, and not most of the business transactions, not just government tenders.
Yeah.
right? There's no substitute for showing up, right?
Exactly. So I would say that, when you're, especially when you're tendering, just be involved in the whole process. When you're um, reading the eligibility criteria, also write down the name of the SPOC. Also chase him down a couple of days a week. Maybe if you're working 5 days a week, chase him maybe 3 days. Talk to him. Ki kya hua, kya hua, kya hua. We've done the work. My person has done the execution. Now we've handed over the project to your guys. So what is the payment going to be? How is it going to be like? It comes in late. It comes in maybe sometimes 4 months late, but it does come in. So, and the ticket size again is very good. So, one, it's worth the wait, and two, the more aggressive you are, the more they have you in their minds. So, whenever they see that it's your
Yeah.
phone call, they'll be like, "Arey, I have to pay this person. Arey, I have to pay this person." So, and that's how mostly it works. So, at least in Maharashtra, you just have to show up. You have to speak with them. And sometimes, even if you might not like them, don't necessarily show it. Just be nice.
Again, again, that's true for most of the business transactions. Uh, Right, very interesting. So now we are done with this. We have a surprise for you. Now we are going to play a rapid fire round, full Karan Johar style mein. Uh,
Nice.
so you have to answer the questions very quickly.
Okay.
First question is morning ritual, coffee or green tea?
Oh, neither.
Okay, you don't take anything. Wow.
No, nothing.
Favorite legal case, one that kept you on your toes.
I wouldn't call it my favorite, but the one that kept me on my toes and the one that was, tragic for the whole country was the Nirbhaya case. I think it was something that, it was the lowest point, and I was following up the updates of the case. And at that time, I was just a student. I had not even decided to do law. So at that point in time, I was following the matter, and I remember the kind of impact it had on me.
Wow. No, now the next question is, we know you are an avid reader. So what will be, according to you, the best book you have ever read?
There's so many of them, but probably I'm a Dostoevsky fan. So right now, what I'm thinking of is The Brothers Karamazov
Wow.
by Dostoevsky.
I won't even pretend that I know the names and that you have mentioned. Moving on, what's your hidden talent? Something not many people know about you.
I'm a wonderful cook.
Okay. Next question. What's your bucket list destination?
It's Japan. It's been Japan for so long.
Right. I hope you visit it someday. Uh, Last question. What's your life motto?
Never waste a good crisis.
Very good answer there. Okay, so as we are running out of time, I'll ask just two questions with you. We know that you are quite good in the art of drafting, and we understand that at one point you have drafted more than 60 documents in 9 months, right?
Yeah.
That's impressive. So what principles guide your contract drafting? How do you ensure clarity and enforceability?
So, when it comes to that, I think I go back to my student days a lot. I open my Bear apps. I read the sections, and there's this after the section, there's this explanation note, and there are illustrations, and sometimes there are also ingredients of a particular section. So when I'm drafting a document in accordance with a particular section, I also read out the ingredients that are mentioned in the particular section, and I ensure that those are captured in whatever I'm drafting.
Wow, great insight there. So my last question is, and this was one of the reason we invited you, is the amazing work you are doing in the renewable energy sector. So as a corporate lawyer in this sector, how do you address legal challenges related to sustainability? And my one more add-on question, what does impact assessment play in your advice to clients?
Okay, so very interesting. So let me answer your first question regarding renewable energies and sustainability. So right now within India, the number of players in this market are up and coming. and the kind of technologies that we have are amazing. So I find it in my role is not just as an in-house counsel, but it is also as a catalyst for innovation and change. So when I'm working in this particular sector, I'm working with the current organization, I don't just feel that I'm working as their lawyer. I also feel empowered that I am going to be a catalyst in bringing about a change in the future and in the way the world is going to see things. So sometimes you have to look at your role from all sorts of perspectives before kind of hopping onto the job. And coming on to impact assessment, we have different kinds of impact assessments. First is the environmental impact assessment, which you mentioned and which we have captured under the Environment Protection Act. The second is the carbon credits assessment. And the third is the extended producer responsibility assessment. So I'll just quickly get onto each. So the EIA, which you had referred to, uh, needs to be done before and after we take on a particular turnkey project. So suppose I have been allocated a fixed piece of land and I've been asked to deploy biogas, I've been asked to deploy plasma waste destructor, I've been asked to deploy, let's just say, a trommel and a bait. These are very technical equipments which I've been asked to deploy. Before I deploy these, I have to check out what kind of environment this is in. I have to do a survey, what kind of soil this is, what kind of land this is, what is the temperament of the people here. Would they support an environmental innovation? Would they hinder it? And then after I deploy my project, after my whole turnkey project is executed, I again have to do an impact assessment saying what it was, just like your classic before and after. What it was before, what we did, how it is currently, and how well it is fitting within the Environment Protection Act and its parameters. The next is carbon credits audit, which is very interesting. So supposing your organization is doing the noble work of reducing the global ecological and carbon footprint, you actually get paid for it. Or you actually get, you get a good remuneration or you get something really nice in return. So there are companies which would do a carbon credit audit and their parameters are also very strict. So it would depend on project to project whether this audit is needed or not, but it's optional. And the last is the extended producer responsibility, which is hitting the headlines these days. That suppose if I am someone who, let's just say, produces a packet. I am a chips manufacturer, and that is why I use a lot of plastic. But do I dispose of it properly? Do I take care of it? So if I don't, then I have to pay a certain penalty. Or if I contact an EPR agency, they manage my plastic for me and they give me a certification saying that, you have done this. That way my penalty is saved and I get something from the government. So a lot of waste management entities and a lot of players in the renewable energy sector are also looking at now being an extended producer agency. So that's something which is I'm currently working on, and I'm finding it very interesting to dive into.
No, that's really interesting. So on this point, I have a follow-up question for the carbon credit, right? So imagine that, I am a organization that is doing something because of which I get one carbon credit, for instance, right? So then how would I sell it? How much money will I be getting paid today?
See, that depends, number one, kind of business that you do. Number two, kind of carbon footprint which that business generally has, and the kind of carbon footprint you have reduced. So the whole thing is commensurate. As per my limited understanding on calculations and mathematics, one reason I became a lawyer, to steer clear of mathematics. As per my limited understanding of that subject, I think the calculation is commensurate on what the industry standards are and how much you have reduced it. Also, if you do happen to have a carbon credit audit, the agency who would be doing the audit for you would also claim some share of the commission. So,
Yeah. So who are the biggest buyer of carbon credit these days?
I think the government, because it's their initiative.
Right. So yeah. So this is something like, if any business is working in a renewable sector, this is one thing they should be looking out for, because if they
Yeah,
right, they are losing out on a big
big opportunity.
right.
Absolutely. That and extended producer responsibility, because um because dry waste, wet waste तो मतलब उसका कुछ हो ही नहीं सकता. Wet waste you have to make it into compost, and wet waste decomposes and rots. But dry waste on the other hand can bring you income if you're smart about it. So, and it's not just excuse my language of words, but it's not just for the scavengers, or it's not just for the scrap guys that you have to sell it. You
Right.
can actually sell it to the government.
Wow, that's really interesting. And see, this is what I've been advising to a lot of people who are in the sustainability or who are doing any kind of manufacturing or any activity that is producing, that is having an environmental impact, that you need to look out for this particular area of compliance, because more, this is going to be getting more complicated. So in the future, I also have an idea of bringing some expert who specialize completely in just this area, and
Yeah. Yeah.
like having a like an hour discussion just on doing these kind of compliances. A panel discussion, we would be more than happy to invite you in that one.
Oh, I'd
So
be happy to come.
right, so that's pretty much it, right? And we would be, this is like, to our listeners, I would say this, don't take this podcast is just the starting point for you to understand what these things are.
Just the broader picture.
Right, just get a broader picture. We will be creating blogs on these specific aspects of compliances and opportunities. Go and read them in detail and then, take up a call.
Make a move. Yeah.
Okay, Radhika, thanks a lot for joining us today.
Thank you so much for taking out time on a weekend and inviting me. It's been so much fun, and I'm really honored to be attending this podcast. And it's been such a pleasure to connect with you one on one, and I would definitely like to keep in touch.
Absolutely, Radhika. Thanks a lot. You're quite humble. Uh,
Thank you.
I'm sure our listeners have gotten a lot of value from this. We look forward to, meeting you again on some panel discussion or another podcast.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful weekend. Bye.
Bye. And that wraps up our enlightening conversation with the incredible Radhika Kulkarni. Be sure to check out her blog for more thought-provoking reviews and reflections. Radhika, thank you for sharing your journey with us today. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Let's Discuss Cafe. If you enjoyed today's episode, as always, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Until the next time, stay caffeinated, stay curious. I'm your host, Avinash Tripathi, and this is Let's Discuss Cafe. See you soon.